Hi everyone, and welcome to part one of my video, my tragic Hollywood star of the week, Marilyn Monroe. She's the poster girl for tragic Hollywood. She's in my first book, Tragic Hollywood, Beautiful, Glamorous, and Dead. We'll find out exactly what happened to Marilyn and why her career ended so abruptly and tragically. Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Tragic Hollywood on the Town. I've been missing in action from my Facebook page, but I've been trying to keep up with the videos, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most famous tragic Hollywood icons ever, and I'm talking, of course, about Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe is in my book. She's in my first book under the heading of Tragic Blondes. There's a lot to say about Marilyn, but before we get to that, can you please like and subscribe and check out my books. Let's talk a little bit now about Marilyn Monroe. I'm going to probably say a few controversial things. There's a lot of rabid Marilyn Monroe fans out there still today, and sometimes they get upset when I talk about Marilyn because I don't reinforce the narrative that they have in their head about their beloved star. I talk about her in terms as if she were a real living, breathing human being, not an icon set up on a pedestal to worship. So let's talk about Marilyn in these terms and not talk about her as if she were some inanimate object, some perfect being that fell from the heavens, was never flawed, was perfect in every way, shape, or form. Because Marilyn was a heavily flawed person. A very much flawed person. She couldn't help but be flawed. She had one of the most traumatic childhoods that a movie star had ever had. She was born in 1926, and guess where she was born? Hollywood, California. You don't hear that very often. Most of the time, movie stars come from other places in the country. Even if they come from California, they come from other places. But Marilyn was born right there in the heart of things. She was born in Hollywood, California, to a mentally unstable woman named Gladys Baker, who was a film cutter at Paramount Studios. She had it rough from the very beginning. Her mother essentially gave her up to foster parents. And actually, this was a good thing for Marilyn because she spent 7 years with these people, and they were 7 of the most stable years of her life. When her mother bought a small bungalow, either bought or rented a small bungalow near the Hollywood Bowl in 1933, she decided she'd try to be a mom again. So she brought Marilyn to live with her. But it was a mistake. Things didn't work out, and Gladys dwindled into mental illness very quickly the following year. Gladys had a friend, a very good friend. Her name was Grace, and Grace was a huge movie buff, and she decided that she took pity on Marilyn, who had nowhere to go. I guess the foster parents didn't want to take on the responsibility, so she took Marilyn under her wing and allowed her to live with her. And since she was such a huge movie buff, she would take her to the movies all the time. And one of the stars, the big stars at the time, was Jean Harlow, the original blonde bombshell. And so Marilyn became enamored with Jean Harlow. She thought Jean Harlow was one of the most beautiful creatures she had ever seen in her life. And that was then that she became, she was bitten by the acting bug, and she decided, maybe I could do that too. Maybe I could become like Jean Harlow and be famous, and people would love me, because she was seriously lacking in love in her life. So it's no wonder she would want to pursue a profession where on the surface it seems like you're loved by millions, which is a facade and a joke, which she would find out later. But because true love isn't found in the masses, it's found around the people you surround yourself with. But Grace was young. She was in her 20s. And when she got married, she decided there wasn't any room for Marilyn in her life, so she simply put her in an orphanage. There's rumors that Marilyn was dragged, kicking and screaming, to this orphanage, yelling that she had a mother and that she didn't belong there and that she wasn't an orphan. How heartbreaking is that? How traumatic is that? She spent many years in this orphanage, kind of abandoned by everybody. So Grace eventually petitioned to be Marilyn's guardian, but for some reason she didn't take her out of the orphanage for several months. Finally, she did take her out, and she brought her home to live with her and her new husband, who was named Doc. Okay, Doc Goddard. Marilyn claims that this was hell because she claimed that Doc molested her. And this was when she was quite young, like 12, maybe 13. So she goes from the frying pan into the fire, essentially. Eventually, though, Marilyn becomes a young teenager, and she meets a man, and his name is James Dougherty. He was actually the neighbor of the Goddards. The Goddards were planning to move to West Virginia. They couldn't take her out of the state. Laws prevented them from doing that. So in order to prevent her from having to go back to the orphanage, they suggested she marry this guy. He's a nice enough guy, but he was an average Joe. Marilyn, by this time, had bigger ambitions than being a housewife, but she married him out of desperation. She didn't want to go back to the orphanage. So, of course, her husband immediately enlisted in the Army and went off to war, and Marilyn went off to a munitions factory in Los Angeles and began working there. And of course, a photographer came there to showcase women and working in the workforce. This was a new and novel thing in the 40s. Women took the place of their husbands' jobs and went to work for the workforce. And the photographer had planned to shoot a whole day, just all these women in the factory, but he only shot one woman. He only took photos of one woman. As soon as he saw Marilyn Monroe, that's all he cared about. And his whole world was spent taking pictures of her. And the rest is history. It was through this photographer that she got an interview with the Blue Book Modeling Agency, and she got work right away as a print model for magazines, mechanic magazines and things like that. And she went to a hairdresser and asked them to take her kind of mousy brown hair to a different level, and they turned it strawberry blonde, and she really liked that. And so she went back and asked them to ump the blonde up a little bit more because she's already thinking, Jean Harlow, I could be another blonde bombshell. She said that the blonder that she became, the more the phones rang. And because of her work in modeling, 20th Century Fox offered her a standard contract. This was a 6-month contract at $75 a week. And I know that sounds like pittance now, but that was pretty good money back then. This is in 1946. She divorced her husband, and she was on her way to becoming a movie star. It was also at this time that they changed her name from Norma Jean Baker to Marilyn Monroe. Her 20th Century Fox contract was dropped because they felt she was too shy and withdrawn to have a future in acting. Columbia Pictures picked her contract up, and it was here that she was offered her first starring role in a B picture called Ladies of the Chorus, and this is where most people first remember seeing her. She did an admirable job. She had been studying acting at the Actors Lab, which was an offshoot, a West Coast offshoot of the group theater on the East Coast. And so she really was learning. She wanted to be a good actress, and I tip my hat to Marilyn. Most actresses of this day never bothered to take acting classes. They got by on their looks and their charisma. Marilyn really did want to be a good actress. She wanted to be taken seriously from the very beginning. She actually wanted to study acting, and this was her chance and her first stint at studying acting. So, but unfortunately, after Ladies of the Chorus, Columbia Pictures dropped her contract as well. So it didn't look like Marilyn was going to cut it. Then she became a little bit hungry, and she did some modeling, nude modeling for a calendar, the famous calendar pictures, under the name Mona Monroe. Like anyone's going to be fooled by that. And these calendar photos would come back to haunt her later on in her career. But a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do to eat, and I don't blame her one bit. for doing the calendar photos, but it was the late 1940s, and that could be a definite career ender before it even got started. So I'm actually really surprised that she was still offered contracts and film roles after this came out. It was around this time that Marilyn became involved with Johnny Hyde, who was the president of the William Morris Talent Agency. It's one of the most prestigious agents, it still is, one of the most prestigious talent agencies in Hollywood. And it was through connections with him that she was able to get bit parts in A-list movies, and one of those was as the bold and blonde, kind of bubble-headed blonde in All About Eve. And this would kind of cement her. She would get typecast as this bubble-headed blonde in many, many movies hereafter, but she made a big splash in this movie. It wasn't a big role, but nobody was looking at anybody else, including Bette Davis, when she was on the screen. Everybody's eyes were riveted towards Marilyn Monroe. So through her connections with Johnny Hyde, she was able to parlay smaller roles into bigger roles and eventually another contract. She went back to 20th Century Fox and she signed a 7-year contract, but with the caveat that they could drop her at any time that they wanted to, of course. Right after she signed this contract with Fox, her mentor and lover, Johnny Hyde, died from a massive heart attack. Many think that she used Johnny Hyde, but I think she generally cared for him. He asked her to marry him. The problem was he was already married to someone else. But he said he would leave his wife. They all say that, but maybe he would have, because I think he was totally in love with her. But this never happened. He ended up dying of a heart attack. I think he was only in his 40s when he died of a heart attack. So she continued her meteoric rise with Fox, eventually landing one of the biggest films of her career. And that film was Niagara. Niagara cemented her as an A-class star. There's one of the longest tracking shots in film history of Marilyn Monroe getting out of a car and walking down parallel to some railroad tracks. And this is a long scene. It goes on for a while, and it just showcases her amazing sex appeal shot from behind, just her kind of swaying her hips gently back and forth as she's walking down parallel to these tracks. Then the camera acts like a voyeur following her. And this was a groundbreaking film, not only for Marilyn Monroe, but for film in general. It was a huge success, and it catapulted Marilyn into stardom. I thought I'd read this part in my book about how impactful this scene in Niagara was for Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn walked down the street. It was an event. The camera kept focus squarely on her as she did the half-wiggle, half-swishing thing for an entire minute. This was the longest single tracking shot in a major film thus far. As she made her way towards the falls, it was as if everything and everyone faded away. So riveting was her image, even as the image got smaller and smaller as she moved further and further down the street. Marilyn literally walked into stardom right then and there. It was around this time that the nudie photos came back to haunt her. And I'm very surprised that Fox didn't kick her to the curb, but I think they really realized they had something special in this star, or budding star, at any rate, after Niagara. So when the news broke that she had posed nude for those calendar pictures, she held a news conference in which she explained that she had been desperate for money, which was true, that she felt that the photos were in good taste, and that the photographer's wife had been present the entire time. Astonishingly, this actually worked. I think people just wanted to believe her. Whether his wife was there or not, maybe, I don't know. But she pulled this off. And it cemented her image as a woman slash child that, just kind of needs a hug that women could identify with in addition to men. So she, in addition to being one of the biggest sex pots of that era that appealed, of course, to men, she was this vulnerable child woman that women wanted to protect as well. And that's hard to pull off when you're flashing your boobs around and swaying your hips and playing these very sexual roles. It's very hard to also pull off that I'm just a little girl, I'm innocent. And she managed to pull this off. And kudos to Marilyn for that, because this led to her becoming an icon, not just a movie star, but an icon. It was around this time that she began seeing one of the greatest baseball players of all time, Joe DiMaggio. You might remember the song, Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel, that line. And here's to you, Joe DiMaggio, our nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Anyway, so she began dating this all-American baseball player with a huge Italian family that was normal, a normal functioning family that this absolutely enthralled Marilyn. And in the beginning, she was very into this. She loved the idea of a large family. He had many siblings and a domineering Italian mother, mama, and she thought this was what she wanted. But at the same time, she's conflicted. I mean, she had a picket fence with Dougherty, but she gave it up because she wanted to be a movie star. Well, now she's enthralled with this man who has the perfect family, and they're all Italian, and everybody loves everybody. And she was just like, oh, I don't know, maybe I want this instead of being a movie star. But that boat had sailed, because now she was cast in one of the other films. She was entering her golden period, so to speak, in which there were a few of these films that she would forever be associated with that would make her kind of like an icon star. And one of these was Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was also noteworthy because it was the first film in which she really became very difficult to work with. And things only got worse from here. I find it interesting that she became difficult only after she had a bit of clout with the studios. But before that, she towed the line, and she was perfect, and she knew her lines, and she was on the spot, and she was never late. But as soon as she had a little bit of movie star clout, something happened, and she began to become extremely insecure. She had to have her acting coach on the set, Natasha, at all times. She wouldn't come out of her dressing room at all. And on Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she wouldn't ever come out unless Jane Russell actually went to her dressing room and escorted her on the stage. This happened every single day of shooting. Otherwise, she wouldn't come out at all. The studios collectively shrugged. Howard Hawks the director nearly had a nervous breakdown. But when the movie was released, it was a phenomenal success. Her song, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, it's iconic. You know, in the 90s, Madonna thought she could redo that song, and she made a copy of that song, and everybody went crazy over it. I mean, Marilyn was a trendsetter, and she continues to be a trendsetter, which is so sad that she died so young and was never able to enjoy much of the fame and acclaim that she achieved. So her and Joe DiMaggio got married, and right away there was conflict. As soon as he married the biggest sex bomb in the country at the time, he suddenly didn't like her being a sex bomb. Hello? What's wrong with this guy? Who did he think he was marrying when he married Marilyn Monroe? He wasn't marrying, Helen Carter. He was marrying Marilyn Monroe. There's a certain level of understanding a person needs to have when they marry a sex bomb, that person makes a living showing off their sexuality on film and on camera. But for some reason, Joe DiMaggio didn't really like this aspect of Marilyn Monroe. And so they began to argue about what she would wear to public events. There was that story that she had on a gold lame dress. This was almost too sexual for the studio, so they didn't ever use it in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. But she was wearing this gold lame dress to this awards. I think it was the Golden Globes. And as soon as he saw her, he said, "You can't wear that. You're not even wearing a bra. I can see your boobs. You can't wear that." And she's like, "I'm going to wear it." And supposedly he hit her. Okay, but she wore it anyway. So that was the beginning of this very damaging marriage. A lot of people like to romanticize this marriage because after her death, he had a standing order of roses be placed on her grave for decades, I think until he died. Yeah, that's nice, but maybe you should have treated her better when she was actually here, and maybe you shouldn't have abused her, both physically and mentally, I might add. That concludes part 1 of our story about Marilyn. In part 2, we'll talk about her time in New York, her time with her third husband, and also what led to her eventual downfall. Stay tuned for part 2 later on in the week.